William Shakespeare is one of the most famous writers who ever lived, but the reason he still matters is not just that his name is famous, it is that his writing seems to understand people. More than 400 years after his death, his plays still feel alive because they are about things that never really change: love, jealousy, power, grief, ambition, family, and the struggle to understand ourselves. Shakespeare was born in Stratford-upon-Avon in 1564, in a small English town far from the big political and cultural centre of London. His father, John Shakespeare, was a glove maker and a local official, and his mother, Mary Arden, came from a respected farming family. We do not know everything about his childhood, but we do know that he probably attended the local grammar school where he would have learned Latin, rhetoric, and classical stories. That education mattered. It gave him the language and structure that would later help him write some of the most powerful lines in English. In 1582, when he was just 18, Shakespeare married Anne Hathaway. They had 3 children, Susanna, and twins Hamlet and Judith. One of the strangest things about Shakespeare's life is how much we do not know. There are years of his life with very little record, and that has created what people often call the lost years. But by the early 1590s, Shakespeare appears in London as an actor and playwright, and from that point on his career begins to rise quickly. London in Shakespeare's time was noisy, crowded, and dangerous, but it was also full of energy. It was the age of Queen Elizabeth I and later King James I. Theatre was one of the most popular forms of entertainment, and plays could attract huge audiences from all levels of society. Shakespeare joined the Lord Chamberlain's Men, a theatre company that later became the King's Men under James I. He was not just a writer, he was also an actor and a shareholder in the company, which meant he had a real stake in its success. This is important because Shakespeare was writing for the stage, not just for the page. He had to think about actors, audiences, timing, and performance. That may be one reason his work is so vivid. His characters do not just talk. They struggle, react, lie, joke, and reveal themselves in real time. In 1599, the company opened the Globe Theatre, one of the most famous theatres in history, and Shakespeare's plays became closely connected with it. Over the next 2 decades, Shakespeare wrote an astonishing body of work. He wrote comedies, histories, tragedies, and later romances. His early plays often show energy, wit, and imagination, while his later works can become darker and more complex. Among his most famous plays is Romeo and Juliet, the story of 2 young lovers caught in the middle of a brutal family feud. What makes the play so powerful is that it begins with love, but that love is surrounded by violence. Romeo and Juliet do not fail because their love is weak. They fail because the world around them is hostile. Shakespeare turns a love story into a tragedy about hate, fate, and timing. Then there is Julius Caesar, a play about politics, loyalty, and betrayal. It explores what happens when power is challenged and whether betrayal can ever be justified by a higher cause. Brutus is one of Shakespeare's most interesting characters because he is not simply a villain or a hero. He is torn between friendship, honour, and fear for Rome's future. Shakespeare is brilliant at making moral questions feel complicated instead of simple. His tragedies are often considered his greatest works. Hamlet is perhaps the most famous of them all. It follows a prince who has been told that his father was murdered and who must decide whether and how to act. But Hamlet is not just about revenge, it is about thought itself. Hamlet thinks so much that action becomes almost impossible. He questions life, death, truth, appearance, and the meaning of existence. That is why the play has lasted so long. It asks questions that people still ask today. Macbeth is another great tragedy, and it is very different in tone. It is a play about ambition, guilt, and the desire to control fate. Macbeth starts as a brave soldier, but once he begins to chase power, everything begins to collapse. Shakespeare shows how ambition can seem exciting at first, but can quickly turn poisonous. The play is full of atmosphere: witches, darkness, blood, and fear. It feels like a nightmare that keeps getting worse. Othello deals with jealousy, manipulation, and race. Othello is a respected general, but he is destroyed by Iago, who slowly plants doubt in his mind. What makes the play so painful is that Othello is not weak in any obvious way. He is intelligent, successful, and deeply in love. But Shakespeare shows how destructive jealousy can be when it grows from mistrust and deceit. It is a tragedy about how easily love can be twisted into suspicion. King Lear may be Shakespeare's most devastating play of all. It begins with an old king dividing his kingdom among his daughters, but what seems like a political decision becomes a story about pride, family, and human suffering. As Lear loses everything, he also begins to see himself and the world more clearly. The play is brutal, but it is also deeply human. It asks what it means to be a parent, a child, a ruler, and an old person facing the end of life. Shakespeare was also a master of comedy. Plays like A Midsummer Night's Dream and Twelfth Night are full of confusion, disguise, magic, and misunderstandings. But these comedies are not shallow. They explore love just as seriously as the tragedies do, only with a lighter touch. In A Midsummer Night's Dream, Shakespeare places lovers, fairies, and ordinary people into the same strange forest, where reality becomes unstable and emotions run wild. The play reminds us that love can make people foolish, but also that foolishness is often part of being human. In his later career, Shakespeare also wrote plays that are harder to categorise, often called romances. These works, like The Tempest, combine loss, magic, forgiveness, and reconciliation. They are more reflective and sometimes more peaceful than the great tragedies. It is as if Shakespeare, by the end of his career, had moved from showing the damage people do to one another toward imagining how healing might be possible. Alongside the plays, Shakespeare wrote 154 sonnets. These are short poems, but they hold a huge amount of feeling and thought. In them, Shakespeare writes about beauty, time, love, aging, memory, and poetry itself. Some sonnets are tender, some are clever, some are complicated and even mysterious. Sonnet 18 asks whether the beloved can be compared to a summer's day, and then answers by saying that poetry can preserve beauty when time destroys it. Sonnet 116 defines true love as steady and unchanging, something that does not shift with circumstances. Sonnet 130 is famous because it refuses exaggerated praise and instead offers a more honest kind of love. Shakespeare is playful there, almost teasing the traditional language of romance, but the ending is serious and sincere. Love does not need fake perfection to be real. What makes the sonnets so powerful is their combination of simplicity and depth. They are written in elegant, controlled language, but the feelings inside them are anything but simple. Shakespeare can sound intimate, reflective, ironic, or heartbreaking, sometimes all at once. He understood that love is not just one thing. It can be joyful, painful, physical, intellectual, loyal, confused, and temporary all at the same time. As for his life outside writing, Shakespeare seems to have become successful enough to buy property in Stratford and secure his family's future. He eventually returned there, and he died in 1616. Even in death, he remains partly mysterious. There are still details scholars debate, and there are still gaps in the record. But the larger picture is clear. Shakespeare was a working writer who became the greatest dramatist in the English language because he understood human nature better than almost anyone else. Sometimes people have questioned whether Shakespeare really wrote the works attributed to him. These theories have been discussed for a long time, but the overwhelming scholarly view is that William Shakespeare of Stratford was indeed the author. The historical record points in that direction, and the plays themselves fit the career of a professional writer working in London's theatre world. What has made Shakespeare last so long is not just that schools teach him or that theatre companies keep performing him. It is that his writing keeps finding new meanings in new times. His plays can be performed in modern dress, in different cultures, with different politics, and they still work. That is because they are built on emotions and conflicts that people still recognise immediately. We still argue like Brutus, hesitate like Hamlet, desire power like Macbeth, doubt like Othello, and suffer pride like Lear. Shakespeare's characters are not distant museum pieces, they are mirrors. He also changed the English language. Many phrases we use today either came from or were popularised by Shakespeare. His influence is everywhere, in literature, film, theatre, music, politics, and everyday speech. He shaped not only how stories are told, but how feelings are expressed. In the end, Shakespeare's greatness comes from a simple but remarkable gift. He could take the biggest questions in life and make them feel personal. He could turn kings and princes into people and ordinary emotions into unforgettable drama. 400 years later, his work still speaks because it does not just tell us about the past, it tells us about ourselves. Shakespeare was born in a small town, but his words belong to the world, and that is why he is still read, performed, studied, and loved today.